So Renee, thank you so much for participating in our Community of Practice YouTube channel that we have. We collab with so many powerhouses that are making changes that the world needs to see for our future generations. So on behalf of SETSI, we thank you for your time and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
All right. So as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toil without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please, if you can do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your remarkable work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Renee Black. I am from Nova Scotia, from Halifax originally, but I live these days in Vancouver on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Where I'm very grateful to share that, be able to share that land, and be privileged to work with different organizations that are trying to advance reconciliation in different ways, and we all have a role to play in that. I think with the work that I have been doing over the last number of years, historically, my work has been more international in focus. I previously ran another nonprofit organization before the one that I'm running right now called Peace Geeks, and working on the intersection of technology and peace. A lot of my work was globally oriented. So we had a lot of work in East Africa and the Middle East especially, but we also had projects in West Africa, other parts of Asia, and in other parts of the world as well. And we also had some projects in Canada that was focused on the way that around newcomer settlement within the Canadian context, especially around the context of the rising anti-immigrant rhetoric that was happening around the presidency south of the border in sort of the late 2010s. And so we were focused on both how do we help ensure that newcomers who are arriving in Canada are well set up to be successful and get access to resources that they need, but also feel welcome in the communities that we're working in. Help also access resources on finding meaningful employment, because this is also a very big barrier, especially and including for people who have meaningful education and skills. I think in the Canadian context, we have far too many cab drivers who have masters and PhDs, and so that was a big part of the work in Canada. But before that, it was really more internationally in its focus, and looking at the way that technology was playing a role in conflict. And we looked at two sides of things, both the way in which technology was playing a contributing role to conflict, as well as the way in which it could be used for peace building. And one of the big takeaways of 10 years of working in this space is it became very clear that the failure to govern technology was a major factor in a lot of conflicts that were happening, both in a more sort of in sort of democratic countries, but especially in countries that were very vulnerable to conflict. And so we see and saw governance as being essential to ensuring that technology can be equally benefiting all. And we're far, 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 far away from that from right now. And Goodbot's focus is really driven from that premise of making sure that technology is developed and governed in ways that will be safe, responsible, and beneficial for all.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And could you articulate your personal mission and vision for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my personal mission has been to make sure that we are addressing the systems issues that we're seeing. I think that far too much of what we are seeing, and this is in some ways, product of the resources that are available, and some of the thinking and understanding around how some of the issues manifest, but we're spending a little too much time focusing around tinkering around the edges of bad things working slightly less bad, and not enough time thinking about what are the underlying systems that are at play that are leading to these bad outcomes. And so I have a personal mission of trying to make sure that we are thinking more in systems and thinking more about the structural causes for a lot of the issues that we're seeing.
That's right. Absolutely. And what inspires you, sorry, about your current work?
Uh, well, I mean, inspires is possibly a little bit the wrong word. I think I feel scared about what happens if we don't work on these issues, about the world that we are building towards if we fail to address some of these issues now. There's an urgency because of the way that technology is being developed, because of who is in control of that technology, and because of who has the capacity to continue to build and control the next generation of technologies. And so, that control is already leading to a lot of work displacement. There's not really a good plan for that, even though these companies are making billions of dollars and making a handful of people extraordinarily wealthy. There's not money being put into good plans for figuring out what every training is. And we haven't even really answer the question as to whether or not the technologies that are being developed are safe and appropriate to be in a democratic society. And so, so there's an urgency, I think, right now because of how big and broadly impacting these issues are. What inspires me, though, is the number of people who are working on these issues, who understand how important these issues are. And, of course, this will come as no surprise, I'm sure, that these are, it's even though there's lots of amazing men working on these issues too, it's disproportionately women, and it's often disproportionately women of color who are working on these issues because they're impacted in ways that are that are not seen to a lot of the public. And so how, ensuring that those voices are amplified as well is very important because of how much the automation of decision making ends up disproportionately impacting specific communities.
Absolutely. We've seen the rise of AI, and these things are coming to surface, chat GPT, these type of things. And, I remember a few years ago, I think it was pre-COVID, in the US, there was a strike against McDonald's workers,
Mhm.
and they wanted an increase in pay. And in the beginning, anyway, I don't know what the final outcome was, but in the beginning, the owner says, well, it's either you work or we replace you with AI. Like, it was just that bold at
Yeah.
this point, because to me, if you're saying that, that means you've already invested into this technology to replace the workers,
Mhm.
So if you're confident enough to say such bold words, then you've already put in the action to do the replacing. So I totally agree with you on this. It needs to be controlled in the right hands so that there's fairness and justice amongst this type of technology. So I agree with you on that.
And it's not just about labor, it's also about like who's getting jobs and who's getting even into the pool of candidates who are who are even sort of surfaced for interviews, who is getting picked out in sort of facial recognition technologies in a drugstore or in an airport. And so there's lots of issues around how technologies have evolved in ways that are often very poorly overseen. Like the accuracy rates are often not that good. And but there's and the logic on which decisions are made is also quite untransparent. And so, but it's having very real impacts on people's lives. And so that lack of transparency means that there's a limited ability to get recourse when a harm happens, and there's a limited recourse to even know that a harm has occurred as a result of a discriminatory or sort of problematic logic. So this transparency piece is extraordinarily important.
Absolutely. Very true. And okay, so what about any challenges or barriers that you face, and how are you working to overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the when I think about the Canadian context, I mean, I'm involved with a lot of a lot of American organizations who have been thinking about the issues for a number of years, and I myself have as well, but I was coming at it more from a what I would characterize as a tech for good perspective when I was running Peace Geeks. So because although we were understanding how technology was a contributing factor, we hadn't specifically laid out at that stage that technology was a decisive contributing factor. And I think if you think back to the Arab Spring, I mean, there's quite a lot of optimism at that time. But of course, what's changed between now and then is that the monetization models have been introduced, and the incentive structures to get a disproportionate return, like from an investor side, have really end up encouraging behavior and business models that are really problematic. There's this sort of accepted normalization of harms that occur in online spaces, and that really should never have been allowed to get to the point that it's at right now. And it's sort of been hijacked by this sort of freedom of speech versus privacy conversation. And like there's just really a need to get past that. There's lots of other tools that are available beyond beyond content moderation. Although I think content moderation deserves a little bit more scrutiny, but there's also things like consumer protection. The fact that social media channels are routinely used by predators to target young girls is very problematic. The fact that the algorithms that are used in social media profiles are really targeting girls' insecurities and leading to an epidemic of anxiety and depression is highly problematic. And all that is monetized in ways that end up making companies wealthier and other communities more vulnerable.
You're hitting really, really key points. Very, very powerful.
But
And
I think just to the question though around challenges though, I think the issue is that first of all, there's a major asymmetry of power. The companies that we're talking about have so much money, so much wealth, so much information. So there's an asymmetry both in terms of the wealth, the information they have around how their tools work, the power that they have to lobby to governments and to affect whether or not governments pass laws. We have a situation right now in BC where an online harms act was about to be enacted specifically around non-consensual sharing of intimate images, and that law has been suspended as the Premier of BC explores a partnership with Meta, TikTok, X, and other platforms in order to basically fast track that. Takedown of problematic content. And this is sort of a pattern we see quite a lot. As soon as a government is getting ready to introduce a law, big tech platforms step in to prevent those laws from getting done. And it's just a thing we see over and over again, whether it's the AI Act, whether it's the ADA and the privacy laws here in Canada, or whether it's these online harms bill. This is just a continuous pattern we see of trying to prevent legislation from getting adopted that can protect communities.
wow. Oh my goodness. And what do you have a set of any key priorities that you're working currently on?
Yeah, so we're trying to build out, because there's quite a lot of resources and a lot more flexibility in terms of the funding that goes to American organizations around working in the space. Technology is just an area that funders have not always had the most flexibility around. It has historically been seen as an infrastructure cost. And so I think that we tend to see work that is treating technology in that way. So there's a lack of flexibility. There's a lack of commitment to the amount of money that ends up being needed to do this type of work. That's a very big barrier. And it's also like, there's also this issue of we're in a scenario where the narrative that is coming out of technology companies is like the cat's out of the bag. AI is here here to stay. All we need to do is now make sure that everybody can use AI in whatever industry that they're working in, and then everything will be better. And at some point we'll get to some weird utopia, and that's just obviously problematic. We can't regulate because China's going to kind of catch up with us. We have to kind of escape that narrative. That is a narrative trap that is being set by companies to basically make sure they make more money. We have lots of agency. We have tools around whether or not we use technology. We have policy tools to make sure that it's being developed in safe ways. There are also taxation tools that we can use to make sure that some of the wealth that is being generated by these companies can go into retraining into AI, sure, but also into lots of other areas. I think there's a need for trades training, and there's a need for healthcare, and so I think that the amount of wealth that's being generated can fund a lot of different types of occupations that may or may not use AI. And so how do we make sure that the opportunities and the wealth that are being created by this are really kind of helping to make a better world? But one of the things that we're trying to do is we haven't seen the kind of robust community around responsible technology in Canada as we see in the States. There's lots of, some of that's just a product of the fact that, trust and safety teams that come out of companies have started to form their own organizations. There's an organization called the Integrity Institute that's really focused on thinking through what are powerful and impactful ways to do trust and safety when it comes to platforms. And so it's really comprised of people who worked in the tech sector beforehand. There's an organization called GovLab that's focusing on open data and how do we make sure that open data can provide better opportunities for shared collaboration. There's organizations like New Public that are trying to think through how do you take like an urban planning or public health perspective to thinking about how we design technology ecosystems, and making sure that we're designing in a way that sort of that we don't kind of get stuck in this is going to work the way that it works, that we have no control over it. Like, what does it look like when it works well, and how do we kind of start to work from there, from that vision of what it could look like. And so what I really want to see that type of coordination and so that type of dialogue happening in Canada. And because we have less money in terms of resources, I think it's really important that Canadian organizations work together to make sure that we're advancing some key priorities that can keep our sort of community safer. We don't have the same type of access and lobbying power as U.S. organizations do. So, this is a problem that I think ends up affecting a lot of countries that don't have the same market power as the European Union does in the U.S. So, what do sort of more secondary markets like Canada? What options do they have to try to bring some power to these conversations and make sure that technologies are evolving in safe ways? And we're building actually specifically something that we're calling the the Canadian Responsible Tech Library. So it's meant to be a library of the policies that we see as being relevant to tech, the kinds of bills that are coming up. We're trying to surface the kind of litigation that's happening around technology harm. So there's, because I think that there's also a problem of you can get stuck in a sense of helplessness when you see how big the problems are and how widespread they are. But there's lots of really important work that's being done to try to bring some accountability. So how do you start to surface what is happening and some of the ways that people are trying to improve how systems work? How do you onboard people in a way that's not overwhelming? Maybe get people into the issues that they care the most about. So for some people, that's going to be about kids because they are the parents of kids and they want to make sure that there's good tools and resources and policies to make sure that technology and social media tools are working well for their families and their communities. But for some other people, it might be disinformation because they work in health and want to make sure that things like coordinated inauthentic behavior that influences the ability to keep communities healthy is not undermining the ability of health workers.
Yes, exactly. Wow. Said a lot, a lot. I hope people are catching this, making notes, because this is very important information. Data-led systems change is so important because that's why we're such a strong advocate to data, data collection, because it does have a sense of accountability to these companies to make the change that we know is needed. So, saying that, how do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm excited to see some of the more social finance models evolving. I think that that's a great development. I think that, um, I think that that kind of flexibility and that kind of innovation is part of what we need. I think that there's more need for more flexible funding, generally speaking. I think that governments have been very risk averse. And I think and I think even in some cases, there's an audit mentality that comes into that. I can recall one of our projects that was sensitive, to be sure, but we spent more time doing our financial reporting than we actually did doing our project. And that's really problematic because it's not just that it diverted time away, it really caused a lot of frustration within our team. We lost team members because they were so frustrated. We would make changes to our project budgets, and it would take, the time window that it was supposed to take was 30 days. In practice, it would take 9 or 10 months, and so you're living in between a budget, and you don't know which one's going to be the one that you have to report against at the end of that. So it creates a lot of stress and uncertainty for teams. Um, so I think building better trust with organizations, I think is a really important objective. And I think there's such a big asymmetry between the amount of money that's getting invested into technology for commercialization versus technology and just any nonprofit activities, and the amount of burden that you end up having to go through to demonstrate your ability and to prove that you've done what you're saying you're going to do on the nonprofit side just makes it that much harder for you to compete. Like, there's an asymmetry in obligations that you also have as a nonprofit organization. And so, I would like to see the companies that are getting invested in also have to do some of the due diligence that nonprofits have to do. I think that that actually would be a much better outcome, because then you have intentional impact assessments happening at the forefront of a product design and development practice, where you are thinking through what are the kind of risks that might be introduced by the tools that you're trying to build and the kind of monetization models that you're exploring. I think we need more of that on the private sector side. I think we need more uh, liability for companies that intentionally cause harm and don't take measures to address those harms in a timely and effective way. And at the same time, I think we need less obligations, I think for nonprofits. And I think that there's ways you can do that smartly. And it's just ended up, and some organizations I think are doing a much better job at that, but some organizations are stuck in audit mindsets where they're basically looking for mistakes. And I think that that's really counterproductive. And it really takes away from the ability of nonprofits to be able to have a meaningful impact in their communities and on the issues they care about.
Absolutely. 100%. Collaboration also is, the only solution for systems change as well. So it's so
Totally.
important. And as I was telling you, we have, as far as SETSI, the Solidarity Working Group, that's the change, that's the impact that we're making, and making one step further to really put words, down onto paper and implementing it as a collaborative force for this system change. Yeah, so it's very
Yeah,
important.
I think, the library that we are building out, actually what we've done as part of that is mapped the nonprofits across the country that we see working on technology issues. And the idea is very much to try to understand what issues are Canadian organizations working on when it comes to technology impacts, and what opportunities might exist to kind of improve collaboration, and at the very least think through what the systems level issues are rather than just addressing the symptoms.
Exactly. And what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you?
Yeah. So what success looks like, I think, is making sure that we have actually inclusive governance around technology. So right now, there's I think citizens are not being very involved in these conversations. They may come to testify before Parliament or in the provinces, provincial houses around issues, but they're not really involved in the decision making around what the kind of governance mechanisms are being developed and how they're going to work. And I do see this as being a big issue. I think that we need Canadians a lot more aware of the kinds of issues and the kinds of enabling conditions that lead to the harms that we see, and having a voice in how policies are being developed. I think that that's a big issue. Um, I think also too, there's the online spaces that we have been the monetization models work a lot better when you're able to put up content that's either polarizing or reinforcing echo chambers, and both of those don't help you to make sense of different perspectives in society. So I think there's really important opportunities to try to uh, build better collective sense making, so that we can solve hard problems together. And so the kinds of tools that we need are the ones that will help us to, of course, there's going to be divisive topics that's going to happen, but can we contextualize divisive issues in the context of a lot of other issues where we actually have a lot of agreement, and not just sort of emphasize these issues in ways that really cause social terrors and social divide. So I think there's really important ways that we can use tools like deliberative polling, and different types of models to really help us understand what we have in common, and then work on addressing those, but then also really try to understand where the issues that are polarizing do show up, where we do have commonality, because I think that there's a lot more commonality even in the divisive issues than we end up being able to engage with through social media spaces in their current form right now.
Exactly. And it's so true, with the common public, because I mean, that's just, we get into a lot of, somebody else I was interviewing, they said a lot of this big jargon, of conversations, but to really engage the community is really keep it on a level so that it's more engaging for them to understand. Like, I'm going to keep it really basic to even say, I bought a monitor, and it's telling me, don't, in the book, make sure you don't be in front of it for too long because it causes cancer. Now, how many people,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just going the basic level of information that needs to be put out there. So if the company is telling me that, how much more does the community or the consumer know? So on that basic level, can you imagine how much work that we have to get through when it comes to AI technology and the consumer?
Yeah. Yeah, we're really far behind in a lot of areas, and that's why we need better strategic partnerships and collaboration, because these problems are so big and they're so interconnected. And unless we work together to address them, we're not going to be able to address them effectively.
Exactly. Oh man, this has been such a powerful, powerful interview. So important to learn all this information and to be very aware of these situations going on right now. So the last question I have for you is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to actions at this time?
No, well, so the Goodbot team is continuing to work on our responsible tech library. We actually at the moment have about so we have a significant volunteer base. So if you are a developer or somebody who's interested in helping to build data sets, we are kind of looking for people to come and join us in that sense. We are of course looking for some funding for the work that we're trying to do, but more importantly, we really want to bring the community of organizations together, um, to uh, to work on these issues collectively. And so one of the things we'd really like to see is a bit of a council of responsible technology. Yeah, sorry. Let me start answering that one again, if that's okay. Okay. And actually, I'm going to skip the first stuff that I said. Yeah, the main call to action that we have is really to start mechanism of bringing together the organizations that are committed to working on these issues, especially from a systems level issue. So we really want to start partnering with the organizations who are already working on this, who see this as a critical priority, and to try to help develop a collective agenda that will allow us to both develop responsible Canadian policy that really engages Canadian communities, and that really starts to think through what are the structural issues and systems issues to address rather than what we've been doing, but also just developing effective working groups and centers of expertise, including coordination between scholars and nonprofit organizations. And yes, industry. I mean, I think that I do see that technology has lots of important opportunities to play. So as long as it's not becoming co-opted. So I think that there's really important roles that can be done through partnerships. It just needs to be structured in ways that helps to drive towards communities having power to ensure that technology is being developed responsibly and in the public interest.
Perfect. Perfectly said. Renee, we really appreciate your time and your leadership. And, these are key important issues that need to be brought to light. And we, on behalf of SETSI, we thank you so much in all that you do. We wish you much success. We know that it's a tall tree to climb, but at some point we will get there. So thanks once again for taking the time out today.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Well, absolutely. We'll definitely be collabing in the near future. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, Renee, much success to you. All the best. And thank you once again. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.